What's that? Okay. Let's see. I'm having a hard time understanding your mumbling. I'm hard of hearing. I am. I think I told this class that I have 2 pitches that I have trouble with. My wife's voice and the alarm clock. So anyway. All right. Now, the first law to try to regulate the trust was the Sherman Antitrust Act. Particularly, it was aimed at men like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and it did a lot to eventually bring these men down somewhat. But the Sherman Antitrust Act, at first the Supreme Court did not understand. The Supreme Court tended to undermine it, but it was a bill passed by Congress and signed about this time that was designed to eliminate, to regulate the trust, or even eliminate them. However, it was a generation later before that it actually became effective. In other words, it was a law like a law that was passed in one generation, but then a generation later, we had a president, 2 presidents back to back, namely Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft, who were trust busters. Roosevelt got the name of trust buster because he busted up 3 big trusts, and William Howard Taft also busted up about 4 trusts. So these 2 men, and the Supreme Court eventually changed to start ruling in the favor of busting up the trust. And today the courts also, now for instance, now when a merger, you might hear of mergers. During the 27 years I was at Lockheed, Lockheed merged with Martin Marietta and became Lockheed Martin. About that time, Boeing merged with McDonnell Douglas, become Boeing McDonnell, or McDonnell Boeing, whatever. But then eventually they dropped the name McDonnell and became Boeing once again. But we once had 8 aircraft companies in the business of putting together aircraft, of which Lockheed was one. Today it's down to 3 or 4, but these companies, in order to merge, had to get permission from the federal government. And it had to go through all kinds of regulation and red tape, but eventually they got permission to merge. But we don't want to be just one airplane company in a business. We want there to be at least 2 or 3. And the federal government, when it issues its contracts, will try to make sure that all these companies stay in business. So during the time I was at Lockheed, Lockheed got a contract to build a C-5, I mean a huge, huge airplane. Then we got a contract to build an anti-submarine plane, the P-3, anti-submarine aircraft. And the big one, we had got a contract to build the F-22. The F-22 was put together well, part of it was put together in Fort Worth, and then another part of it put together in Marietta. But it was actually tested in Marietta. And I saw a test flight one time. There was this aircraft already in the air at the end of this 2-mile-long runway, and the F-22 was on the ground. The F-22 took off as soon as the plane in the air was up. But before they got to the end of the runway, the F-22 was ahead of the other aircraft. And my boss, who was watching it, also said if the F-22 had not gotten to the end of the runway before the plane was already in the air, the F-22 would have been in really bad trouble. But you know, the F-22 started from 0 already on the ground, and it got to the end of the runway and in the air ahead of the plane, or the plane behind it. But anyway, but while we were getting our contracts, Boeing got the contract to build a C-17, which is a big cargo plane, but not as big as the C-5. And so on and so forth, and where they try to keep these companies in business. And oh yeah, the space. We've got private firms now building our next rocket that's going to carry men into orbit, American men into orbit. SpaceX is one of them. We got a couple of them. Being done by private firms and not being done by the government. Now, here, folk, Grover Cleveland. When Chet Arthur's term was up, he wanted to be renominated, but Chet Arthur refused to be told what to do by his political bosses. And also the vice president who takes over usually does not get the respect that a full president does, who is actually elected. but it's happened twice in my lifetime. First time was when Kennedy was assassinated, and Johnson took over. The second time was when Nixon resigned and Ford took over. But, oh yeah, I want to say something else, though, about these assassinations. In 1840, an Indian chieftain got really upset our country. He said every president elected during a 0 year is going to die in office. All right. This curse, he put on the curse of the 0 year. In 1840, William Henry Harrison was elected. He lasted 1 month and he died in office. In 1860, we elected Abraham Lincoln. He lasted 4 years. He was shot dead. In 1880, we elected James Garfield. He survived a few months, shot dead. 1900, we actually elected William McKinley first in 1896, but we re-elected him in 1900, shot dead in 1901. I mean, I'm not saying what I believe, just these are facts, folks. William McKinley actually was shot dead in 1901.
Yeah,
In 1920, Warren Harding was elected. Warren Harding died under mysterious circumstances in 1923. 1940, and we actually elected Franklin Roosevelt in 1932. But in 1940, we elected Franklin Roosevelt again for a third term. Franklin Roosevelt died in 1945 in office.
Wait, that guy died in like Warren Springs, Georgia.
That's it?
That guy died in like Warren Springs, Georgia. Right?
Yeah, died in Warm Springs, Georgia. Yeah, Roosevelt died right here in Georgia. I've been to the room where he died 2 or 3 times. Anyway, in 1960, we elected John Kennedy,
In 3 years.
shot dead in this third year, toward the end of the third year of his office. Now, in 1980, we elected Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was hit by a bullet and would have died, except the right doctor got to him. Actually, we believe the right doctor could have saved both Garfield, not Garfield, but yeah, both Garfield and Lincoln, but not McKinley. I mean, he was really hit. But, and of course, Kennedy, he was really hit also. His brain was blown out. But in 1980, supposedly Ronald Reagan broke the presidential 0 mystery. In 2000, elected George Bush. He survived. So supposedly the mystery, the 0 year mystery has been broken. Or the curse has been broken.
Yeah.
Again, believe what you will, folk. But this was a big issue in politics for more than 100 years. The president's election in a 0 year all died in office, one after another. All right. Anyway, Garfield wanted to be renominated. The Republican Party gave him a big commendation, said in Arthur wanted to be renominated. In Arthur, we had an honest administration, told about how good a president Arthur was, made him feel a little bit better. Arthur died within a year of being unknown to anyone else until many years later. Arthur had a kidney infection and knew he was not going to live long. But nevertheless, the Republicans nominated Blaine. The Democrats nominated a man named Grover Cleveland. Now, Cleveland is unique among our presidents in that he was the only one to be elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. So, by an act of Congress, he goes down as the 22nd and 24th President of the United States. Now, our present president is the 45th president, but actually, there's only been 44 presidents, because Grover Cleveland is counted twice. Again, this is due to an act of Congress. He was the 22nd, he was elected. The next election, he lost. Then the election after that, he was reelected. So he was elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. Now, the first time he was elected, the campaign got really, really dirty. And at a young boy was put up, about an 8-year-old boy, whose last name was Cleveland. This boy did not have a father. But the Republicans said Grover Cleveland is this boy's father. Grover Cleveland never denied it. Now, there are some historians who are saying that Grover Cleveland was actually trying to cover up for a buddy of his, but he never owned up to it, never denied it either. His advisors said, whatever you do, you must deny this, you must fight this. He told his campaign, he didn't say it himself, he told the campaign manager, you tell what you know to be the truth. The campaign manager went out and told that Grover Cleveland was actually the father, and Grover Cleveland never protested it. You wonder, well, how did Grover Cleveland get elected? Because the Republicans put up a candidate whom the people felt like was not even honest. Now, the electorate, a lot of the electorate said, well, at least this man is honest. Again, he might have been covering up for a buddy, but whatever. He took the blame, he took the credit for being the father of this man. The election was really nasty. A popular saying, and this is in your book, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?"
Yeah.
Eventually, the answer the Democrats gave was, "He's on his way to the White House, ha, ha, ha." That was after the election. But the election was close. It was hard fought. It was dirty, one of the dirtiest elections in all of history. But Grover Cleveland won it over Tilden. There was some disputes, but Tilden said he took the honorable route. He said, we just went through a few years ago a disputed election, and I don't want to be involved in another dispute. So Tilden took the back seat, and Cleveland became president.
So you said he was president twice?
Yeah, twice. He was president, then he got unelected, then he got elected again. 2 non-consecutive terms. The only president in history who was elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. We've had several who've been re-elected. Now, what kind of president was he? Your book, all right. The worst depression we'd ever had occurred particularly during his second term. Your book, taking a more liberal socialistic stance, will tell you that Grover Cleveland should have done something to solve the problem, folks. Grover Cleveland refused to spend the money to get us out of depression. All right, now, some historians then have rated Grover Cleveland as being one of the top 8 presidents we ever had, one of the best, because of this refusal. A man by the name of Coxey, I'm not going to write him down, he won't be on the test, but Coxey got together with a group of people and marched toward Washington. This is called Coxey's Army. And they said that, Mr. President, there's a lot of bridges that need to be built. There's a lot of parks that need to be built. There's a lot of government buildings that are crumbling that need to be rebuilt. We can do this work, but it would cost a whole lot of tax money. But basically, Mr. President, borrow the money you need, and let's do the work. A lot of persons believe that if President Cleveland had yielded to this nation would have become bankrupt long ago. Now, what we're going to find out is, folks, the worst depression in our history occurred in the 1930s. This one was the second worst. And the president we had then, Franklin Roosevelt by name, was elected on a promise that he'd help the poor. And he used government money to aid the poor. And folk, even your book will admit, the depression kept getting worse in spite of government aid. And from that day till this, the government has gotten deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. We set debt ceilings. Oh yes, we have a debt ceiling. When we get to the debt ceiling, we just raise the ceiling. Get to the debt ceiling, we just raise the ceiling. Can we continue to keep going deeper into debt, deeper into debt? Now I have more to say about this when we come to the Great Depression of '30, but in the case of Grover Cleveland, he refused to spend our way out of depression. And I myself, personally, I'm going to commend him for it. Your authors don't. Your authors make it sound like he was insensitive to the poor, didn't care about the poor. But I believe that if he would have put the country deep into debt, taxes would have gotten heavier, like they eventually did. Today our taxes are really, really high compared to what they once were. And what would it have done for the poor? All right, folks, the same thing that government aid has always done to the poor, make everybody poorer. Now on my way in here, I was tuned to a certain radio station. I won't tell you which one. And that station was saying, this country of ours, this great United States, is heading down the road towards socialism. And some of your certain candidates from a certain party realize this, and they're going to make this country more socialistic than ever because it'll get votes. I wish they'd consider Venezuela, among other things. the Soviet Union in the 1930s, China in the 1950s, both of which had millions of people starved to death, when there were abundant harvests, folk. How do you starve to death with abundant harvest when the government has control and the government takes you all the crops and redistributes them, and accidentally, without meaning to, leaves some people out? But anyway, we're heading that way fast. Grover Cleveland refused to spend his way out of debt. But again, I'm going to keep that in mind. I'm going to have a lot more to say about that later.
Do you think he believed in that Darwinist theory?
No, he was not Darwinist at all. He believed that the government should keep its nose out of private business and not regulate, but let that business take care of itself. Now, as for the Depression, all right, the country eventually pulled itself out of the Depression without any government assistance. This was to happen again right after World War I. When World War I was over and the millions of troops came home and a lot of them couldn't find jobs, we had a major recession, a big depression. It's called the Forgotten Depression. A man wrote a book about it. Where was our president, Woodrow Wilson? Flat on his back, suffering from a massive stroke. Completely paralyzed, or almost completely paralyzed. We had no president. The vice president refused to act. So Mrs. Wilson would forge her husband's signature on bills that came in. Actually, we had a woman president at that time. She was our president. And what happened with no leadership? The country pulled itself out of the Depression, pure and simple. Then we forgot about it. But then came the greatest depression of all, the 1930s, and we had a government that tried to pull us out. And the result was we've gotten ourselves into debt, and we're going deeper and deeper and deeper in, and the question becomes, when are we going to get ourselves out, or how deep can we go? Or are we just continuing this forever? All right. Folk, again, I just want to say this about depression, then we'll take a little break. In a free economy, depression, recessions are a natural part of the growth, folk. It's just the way things are. We are, being human like we are, will tend to think that all this upturn will last forever, and eventually our stuff gets overvalued. We produce too much, more than we can sell. I mean, we just do. And then we have to lay off workers for a while until reality catches up. Then it climbs back up again. Now, what we've done today, we've used government regulation to try to knock off the high points, fill in the low points, knock off the high points, fill in the low points, knock off the high, fill in the low, make for an even keel. But will the government, and of course to do this, we borrow. Basically, the government borrows. How much, again, the question becomes, how much longer can we borrow? How much more can we borrow? Our budget has not been balanced since the Great Depression of the 1930s. I mean, individual years, like Richard Nixon balanced the budget in 1969, Bill Clinton balanced the budget twice during his 8 years, but both of these men had deeper debts than what we could get out of. As I understand it right now, our debt is so bad that every man, woman, and child would have to pay $600,000, and most of us don't have that kind of money. I don't. You pay $600,000 in order to pay off the debt. And how are we going to get it paid? But nevertheless, we keep on going because it's worked until now. How much longer will it work? For how much? All right, folk. Be back in about 10 minutes, and we'll go over the last chapter before the test.